80,000 yards. You lead the NFL. You're number one in history in terms of passing yards. I believe touchdowns with 571, if I remember correctly. His accuracy was one of the all-time greats in terms of that. And I think that he was class personified. I mean, a lot of noise was made during the whole social justice issue movement about, what his opinions were and how they differed from that of his teammate Malcolm Jenkins and others. But the reality is that anybody that knows Drew Brees knows that he's been class personified. He's been a voice on behalf of the players for the NFL Players Association. He's just a class individual. He's a champion. He's an all-time great as a passer. There's no doubt about that. And I'm looking forward to seeing him in the booth as well. He's going to have a challenge in that regard because I think that Tony Romo has raised the bar with his charisma, with his football acumen as well. But we know that Drew Brees has that. There's no question about that. But having that charisma in the booth for NBC, that'll be interesting to see. But that's the only question mark about him. Nobody's going to ever question his credentials. Nobody's going to ever question the fact that he's one of the all-time great quarterbacks. And to be quite honest with you, one of the all-time great people. And I think that who would have ever thought that we'd see a retirement announcement like that with your 4 kids and do it? That was such a beautiful, beautiful scene. But it's typical of what you get from Drew Brees, a guy that gets it done and is class personified in doing so and just leaves and touches on your heartstrings and things of that nature. I'm just happy for him. He's 42 years of age, and obviously he thought it was time to go, and it is, and by and large, by the way most of us feel. And nothing but the best to him moving forward.
Pardon. Look, Drew Brees is a Hall of Famer. When I think Drew Brees, I will think accuracy. He's the most accurate quarterback I've ever seen. And I refer to the social media thing. It went viral a little while back where he's competing against an Olympic archer. An Olympic archer. And the Olympic archer from the same distance hits the bullseye like 3 out of 10 times, and Drew Brees hit it 7 out of 10 times, something like that. He's more accurate with the football than an archer, an Olympic archer. And I think New Orleans, getting traded from San Diego to New Orleans, he became, and then going through Katrina, and then winning a Super Bowl there, and then even what he says, I'm retiring from football, not from New Orleans. I absolutely identify him with that area. But more than all that stuff, Drew Brees has something. If you've ever been in the same room with him, ever talked to him, and I have a couple of times through the years, he has something. Guys, Magic Johnson has this. When Magic Johnson walks into a room, you can see that everyone in that room wants to be the best version of themselves. They don't want to let Magic down. He has that, whatever it is he has that makes people feel that way. And he also somehow makes you believe in yourself. Drew Brees, who I've not dealt with nearly as much as Magic, he walks into a room, everyone feels good. And there's something about you mentioned charisma that Tony Romo has on the air. It's a different kind of charisma or effect on other people. And you can see why he was a great quarterback and a great leader. And that's what I'll remember about Drew Brees.
Yeah, I think Drew Brees is the greatest free agent signing in the history of the NFL. It's better than Reggie White. He's better than Peyton Manning. It's better than when Deion Sanders signed as a free agent. I think he's the greatest or one of the greatest players at his position to ever come into the NFL, and he's probably a better person in comparison to the player that he was. He absolutely, unquestionably has earned a seat at the table when we have the conversation of greatest of all times. We're talking about a guy, there's 11 times in the history of the NFL has a quarterback thrown for 5,000 yards in a single season. Drew Brees has done it 5 times. He's got the greatest completion percentage in the history of the NFL. 6 out of the top 9 seasons Drew Brees has. There's been 3 quarterbacks in the history of the NFL that have a QBR of 70 or more. Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, Drew Brees. He leads in yards. He leads in completions. He's got the streak of touchdown passes on consecutive games, 54. He's going to hold multiple NFL records. He's one of the best quarterbacks that we've ever seen come into the NFL. But it's also his impact on just quarterback play. Quarterback conversation 15 years ago, we used the word accuracy. Max, you just did. I actually think Drew Brees took it to a different level. There's a difference between being accurate and and being able to have ball placement. His ball placement's the greatest ever. And now that makes us look at quarterbacks a little bit differently. I also question, would Russell Wilson be Russell Wilson and the Russell Wilson that we know of without a guy like Drew Brees, without a guy that was shorter and didn't have the strongest arm and had to make up for those things, how to take weaknesses and make them strengths by work ethic and mindset and focus and all that stuff. So I think his impact on football is unmeasured, and we don't really appreciate how great of a person when it comes to that Drew Brees was. So greatest free agent signing in the history of the NFL to me.
Works for me. Works for me, Molly.
Guys, can I get in here? Because I want to talk a little bit more about the numbers. And Dan, you mentioned some of them because they're really quite impressive. And I didn't realize he was first in so many categories. So I want to pull up a full screen really quick, obviously, for this future Hall of Famer here. He's first in pass yards, gentlemen, first in completions, first in completion percentage, in second in pass TDs. I mean, really tops in these imperative categories. So, Max, I'll ask you this. Does he belong in the top tier of best quarterbacks of all time?
Don't do this to me this morning. You're going to make me this guy this morning, Molly.
I have to.
He just retired. His kids are there, and I admit he's a Hall of Famer and an all-time great. I interpret that question to mean, is among the greats all time, is he in the inner sanctum of those greats? My answer is no. Again, I take no pleasure in saying that this morning because he just retired, and I have a lot of admiration for him, and I love to watch him. My answer is no. The inner sanctum, look, guys, you should be a top, sometimes the best quarterback in the league. Certainly like one of the two best quarterbacks in your era. And always in the top three. That simply hasn't been the case for Drew Brees. You can pretend to be shocked by that, Dan, but the fact of the matter is,
how you get to that. How do you get to that?
Well, when Tom Brady and Peyton Manning and Drew Brees and Aaron Rodgers were all in the league, Drew Brees was fourth and among that group. And then now there's Patrick Mahomes instead of Peyton Manning, but it remains the same. Drew Brees is an all-time great. Love him. But when you talk about the very greatest of all time, he's probably in the top 10. I think there's a good argument that he's right around 9 or 10. But you could even argue a little bit lower. You could argue a little higher, but certainly not top 5. He was never the best player in the league, almost never really the second best player in the league. And so if you're talking about the absolute, like, who are the greatest of the greatest, there was Brady and Peyton, and then Rodgers. Brees was not quite there. There was Montana, and if you want to talk about other guys who you might compare to Brees and who maybe I was a little more impressed with when they were at their very best, Marino, John Elway, Brett Favre, and he fits in there with those guys, but maybe not at the top of that list. So an all-time great, first ballot Hall of Famer, among my favorites. If you're asking me, is he in the top tier of the all-time, then you're forcing me to say no.
You're out of your mind. You're out of your mind. I love you. You're out of your mind. We just rattled. He's first in a bunch of statistical categories. The one he's second in is behind Tom Brady. He never had a consistent defense the way that Aaron Rodgers did, or the way that Tom Brady did, or the way that Peyton Manning did. And you're allowing a freak play, the Minnesota Miracle, or a horrific officiating situation against the Rams to jade your view, because he's got a ton of statistical rankings. He's one of the greatest ever when it comes to all that stuff. He's got his Super Bowl trophy. He revitalized the city. Like, what else would he have needed to do to say that he's in a top tier? That's like saying Phil Mickelson isn't in the top tier of greatest golfers ever. He is. He just happened to do it in the same era as Tiger Woods. Like, you can't knock Drew Brees for playing in the same era as the greatest quarterback ever.
But who was the fourth best golfer of the Tiger Woods era? That's the point.
What?
Drew Brees was usually around the fourth best quarterback in the league. Sometimes the third, usually around the fourth, Dan.
So you're going to knock him for playing in the same time frame as inarguably the greatest quarterback ever, and arguably probably a top 2, 3 quarterback ever in Peyton Manning. So you're going to take those guys around. And I love Aaron, and Aaron's up there for me. So, disclaimer, why is Aaron ahead of him? Because he's more talented? Because they have the same amount of Super Bowl trophies? Drew Brees has more.
Aaron Rodgers is better. Come on.
But why? Why? What? Because he's more
Every
talented.
year, Aaron Rodgers' presence on his team means the odds makers make the Packers among the favorites to win the Super Bowl because they have Aaron Rodgers.
Max,
Not,
because
a lot of the
Aaron
times that
Rodgers
wasn't the case.
Aaron Rodgers consistently had better defenses than Drew Brees. Consistently.
Dan, Drew Brees played half his games in a dome where he put up great numbers. Like, I don't want to, like, he's an all-time great. But when we're talking about the uppermost crust, the guy should have probably multiple MVP awards, usually be considered the best or maybe the second best quarterback in the league, not usually fourth or maybe sometimes third. And by the way, passing stats in this era have gone through the roof. Of course the numbers are going to look better for the quarterbacks of this era.
First of all, I think it's important that both of you just calm down. There's no need to be this emotional this early. I mean, you really, really need to just calm it down, just dial it in just a little bit there. That's number one. Number two, here's the one thing that I will say, Dan Orlovsky. I do not have Drew Brees as a top 5 quarterback of all time because of that second Super Bowl championship that escaped him. Me personally, I definitely have him top 10 all time. I definitely have him as a future first ballot Hall of Famer. He's one of the greatest quarterbacks in NFL history, and I don't think there's anything to sneeze at to be considered top 10 all time. Okay, when we talk about top 5, I think it's debatable, but I think when it comes to Drew Brees, that is the only thing that's available, that's debatable. I don't think there's anything else about him that's debatable based on his resume. When you're number 1 in passing yards, when you're number 1 in touchdowns or completions as well, when you're number 1 in those categories, when you've got a Super Bowl championship, when your career level of accuracy equates at around 67%, when you spent the vast majority of the last decade completing over 70% of your passes in history, every season, I just look at it from the standpoint that he's definitely one of the all-time greats. His lack of mobility and what have you, of course, Dan Marino had that same issue along with Dan Fouts and others. We get that. But I think that in today's era, you can hold that against Drew Brees to some degree, but again, only as it pertains to Super Bowl championships or lack thereof. The fact is, if you're Aaron Rodgers and you're watching someplace, you need to look at Drew Brees' career because we might be saying the same thing about you. If Aaron Rodgers has another Super Bowl title or 2, we might call him the greatest quarterback ever from a talent perspective. A lot of us feel that way already. But we might be talking about that. But the reason why it's not something that we even discuss is because one Super Bowl championship, the last one coming in 2010, is just not good enough for somebody of his caliber. Yeah. Well, Drew Brees got the Super Bowl championship the year before, and that was his only Super Bowl championship, even though there was some fluke plays that happened that were no fault of his own that prevented him from getting a second.